Many of you who have begun to delve into the world of tabletop role-playing games might have heard of something referred to as Session Zero. Depending on who you ask, it is where your adventure begins with your first quest, your first encounter with the supernatural, or your first glimpse at the eldritch truths of the world hidden behind the thin veil of sanity. Some people will say that it's a prologue to that adventure, where your ragtag bunch of adventurers or investigators meet up at the DM's tavern slash town square slash jail of their discretion, where the characters properly meet and a party dynamic established through circumstances not unusually outside of their control. In some cases, some storytellers call Session Zero the time where they tell a player that no, they cannot play as a half demon, half werewolf master samurai in a story set in 1920 San Francisco. In my personal experience, it's this latter interpretation that I feel helps smooth things out for the rest of the table's length, however long it might be. It helps set the tone of the campaign, allowing both the players and the GM to create characters that will seamlessly integrate into the game's world, while also being functional within the system's rules. Because believe me, nothing is more frustrating than rolling stats for a character made for an investigative, social role, and then having to twiddle my thumbs for hours because the DM secretly wanted us to dungeon crawl through the Tomb of Annihilation, and suddenly my +6 bonus to diplomacy isn't going to convince any zombies to stop eating my body's brains. Throughout this video, I might be using different terms such as Dungeon Master or DM, Narrator, Storyteller, or Game Master or GM. They are all one and the same entity, the person in charge of providing the context for the players to experience and interact with. Similarly, I might be using terms which are drawn directly from Dungeons & Dragons or World of Darkness since it's the systems I'm personally more familiar with. Anyway, roll the intro. There are plenty of tabletop RPG systems out there, however most start with character creation, so we're gonna begin there. During Session Zero, it's where both the GM and the players come to a mutual understanding of where the game's headed initially. And I say initially because you never know where player interaction with the world might lead you. A campaign that begins with investigating a supposed call to Nyarlathotep in New Jersey can quickly become a race towards the Mexican border because someone accidentally burned down a McDonald's and the sentence for arson is 10 to 20. With the premise of the game settled, the GM can assist their players with making the most out of their characters while also gaining some insight to what their expectations of the campaign might be. If you got players that are seeking to interact and resolve conflicts outside of combat, the storyteller can create a small network of contacts and persons of interest that the players can engage with through roleplay. If you got more combat-oriented players, then you can prepare encounters and enemies that can present a challenge to the players. Some straightforward, some that will require some outside-the-box thinking, and some that they might need a certain story-related preparation for. If a player wants to give their character a 4-page backstory of how they came to be, that is more resources for the game master to add to their story and drop plot hooks and NPCs from. If a player just wants to give their character a name and start kicking ass, then that's fine too, not everyone gets into RPGs for the same reason. Some just want to engage in combat and loot cool trinkets. A few want to engage in dramatic role-playing and bring out their inner Nicolas Cage. Others want to tell their own story and leave their mark within the game's world, and most just want to have fun with their friends and make them laugh by being silly little rascals. And all of them are valid reasons to play the game. That kind of interest into the system should be rewarded in the game itself, and it's what's going to keep the players coming back and engaging with the system and the community more. Let's say, for example, that the game master doesn't have the time or energy to invest into writing a campaign setting from scratch. Maybe they're inexperienced and aren't sure how to write a narrative that feels compelling on its own. Sometimes procrastination can be quite the obstacle to overcome for them. Maybe they work a soul-crushing corporate job where they spend 60 hours a week doing drone work that leaves very little time to think about how they're going to present the MacGuffin that's needed to stop the evil guy's plan. Well, I have good news for you. Given that some of these role-playing systems have been around the market for an average of 20 to 50 years, there's a large pool of ready available modules and one-shot adventures that you can draw from, only a Google search away for nearly every tabletop RPG on the market. Some might be built for multiple sessions while others are only 3 pages long, but most of the time, most just tell you already from the get-go what the players are in for, how prepared should they be, and how to make adjustments if the number of players you have isn't the same as the model was originally designed for. If you got 5 players instead of 4, well, maybe one of the goblins has a cool cousin named Steve who came riding in with the warg to spend the holidays with his family when the party came in to stop their evil village burning plans. If you got 3 players instead of 4, well, maybe cousin Steve died in a warg riding accident, and now one of the goblins is taking a week to mourn and attending his funeral in another borough along with his wife, meaning that now there's 2 less goblins on guard duty. Remember that as the game master, you can make any adjustments you deem necessary to accommodate or challenge your players depending on circumstance. And hey, maybe that initial one-shot story can become the founding cornerstone from where an original campaign takes off. There is also another important aspect of Session 0, and that is that it allows you to catch, let's call them disruptive player choices. It allows you to catch disruptive player choices early on that will interfere with the table's well-being. It also lets you set some terms and conditions for the table itself. After all, you want it to be an environment everybody will be comfortable in, yourself included. If a player is trying to sneak in something that will upset other players or yourself, you can nip it in the bud before it becomes a problem later on, when all the other players start making excuses not to play because someone's rolling to seduce every barmaid inside, or they want to explicitly detail to a table full of strangers, close friends, or family why their character is always walking around barefoot. Of course, it's not always someone being horny on main. Maybe sometimes it's just someone that is inexperienced with the system trying to build a character that they feel sounds cool on paper, but the game's mechanics aren't going to allow them to be Wolverine at level 1 and take an entire drug cartel on their own. You want players to have fun, not get frustrated because their character keeps failing to meet the expectations they've set in their minds. Helping them set and meet those goals is part of your job as the person in charge of making them possible in the first place. Or maybe while the rest of the party are making good aligned characters, you have someone who wants to play a chaotic evil necromancer causing mayhem wherever they go, which understandably the rest of the party and in-game figures of authority will definitely not agree to. A new player trying to play the evil genius without knowing the basics of the game will likely be quickly found out, which isn't going to be a lot of fun for them. That doesn't mean you can allow some subterfuge within the table from time to time though. An intelligent player playing the Judas and working against the party from behind their backs without their knowledge can be an interesting twist to reveal later on, but that is something that requires cooperation and discretion between both player and GM, as well as the player knowing what they're doing. If you feel like being a game master sounds like you will require to spend hours and days ahead of the game trying to prepare for every possible scenario, I'm gonna stop you right there and say, not really. Sure, it's nice to have a backup plan for when things don't go the way you plan, but as you go through sessions, you realize that the amount of actual preparation you'll need sometimes is mostly reserved for certain important events within the plot. And you'll likely be improvising a lot of optional side quests for the players to engage in. Personally, I feel like I prepared about 40% of the content for my campaigns in advance, like certain NPCs, dungeons, and important items, and how they're involved in the story and whatnot, but the rest I just make up on the fly when players get curious rather than trying to railroad them into following an arbitrary main quest line. For example, maybe there is a haunted lighthouse outside the village that the players might be interested in exploring because of some local legend about a pirate treasure. Or maybe they want to look into a missing person case that the local sheriff hasn't been able to get a lead on. If it sounds like it will be a fun time for everyone, there is very little reason why you as the game master can include it into your game. Just because you said the campaign will be mostly focused on intrigue and mystery doesn't mean that you can have a good old drunken brawl in a bar or two. The game is your sandbox and the players are there to interact it however they desire, be it following the road presented to them or to try skiing down the slope because they saw something shiny at the bottom of the mountain. At the end of the day, the idea is for everyone to have fun and walk away satisfied, and that is what I feel should be what you and your players should agree on first and foremost. That you're all there to have fun, not to fill some imaginary checklist over the course of a couple hours. That's what Ubisoft games are for. I feel like that's a good note to end the video on. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe because that helps me beat the algorithm. If you feel like I might have missed something or got something wrong, let me know in the comments. I'll be sure to check, pin, and reply when possible. Anyway, that's it for today's video, and I'll see you on the next one.